Welcome to another episode of Trap Talk. Today we have co-host Richard Marshall Jr., and we are honored to speak with Hall of Famer Steve Carmichael. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Ricky, would you mind introducing our speaker today?
This is Steve Carmichael, lives in Las Vegas, Nevada, now originally out of Kansas City, Missouri. And Steve's been shooting registered trap, Steve, I think since 1962 or 63.
Yeah, I believe 1962 was the first year that I actually registered targets. I just got my Model 12 trap gun in the fall of 1961. So 62 would have been the initial year.
Okay, so he's inducted to the ATA Hall of Fame back in, I think it was 1996. Steve won the Grand American All-Around in 1980. And he's also the author of the book Blowing Smoke and Blowing Smoke 2. So if you guys haven't got those, get those books. They're a very good read. I've read Blowing Smoke, and I'm halfway through Blowing Smoke 2. So welcome to the show, Steve. Let's get at it.
Well, thanks, Rich. Appreciate that. You know, when I first thought about writing the books, I just hadn't seen anything out there quite like those. And, you know, I was afraid there was some history there and some stories that was just going to get away from us and lost forever. So that's why I took that task on.
Absolutely.
You know, that's wonderful, Steve. And I feel, you know, that was when me and Ricky and we started sitting down and figuring out what we were going to do with this podcast. That's kind of what we were focused on ourselves is highlighting, you know, great people and telling their story and using a different medium. Obviously you're using, you know, the books, and we're trying to do it from an audio standpoint. So, you know, to tell the listeners a little bit more about your book, you know, what does it mainly cover? I've read number 1, but I haven't read number 2 yet. You know, what is the cover and the focus, and how do people get your book?
Well, I just started at the very beginning. So much of my life has been around trap shooting in one way or the other, either as a competitor or in club management. And so, you know, it spanned well over 50 years now. I had a little break in there, but when I go way back to the beginning, it started with a Ducks Unlimited shoot that my dad spotted in the newspaper, Kansas City paper. They was going to have it at Elliott Shooting Park. My dad was an absolutely amazing shot. I hunted with him for years. And I think, too, not to get too off track, you know, that's where a lot of us shooters in the Midwest, that's where we started our shooting careers from, was actually in the field on pheasants and quail, and opportunities that we had back then that I don't think a lot of today's youth have. And so I think a lot of us probably got the term being natural gun pointers. It really wasn't natural. It was just something we was exposed to so early in shooting a shotgun. I shot a shotgun long before I ever shot a rifle of any kind. And my dad just, you know, emphasized, you know, it's a point. Look at it and point. And of course, when you're walking in the field and you flush a covey of quail and you're pointing and shooting, then when you go to a trap field and you can put the gun up to your shoulder and pull for the target, that all seems pretty easy when you compare those types of shotgunning. So it was easy for me to get into the game. My dad actually got into it a little bit first. 1960, he started registering, I believe, in 60. And then in 61, he placed 4th in the Grand American Handicap. But he was just an excellent shot with anything he put in his hands. And so it was easy for me to get into the trap game. And so I shot in 62, 63, a little in 64, 5, and then a little stronger in 66, 67. And in 67, won the Junior Clay Target Championship. My dad and I paired up, in 66. And we paired up to win the father and son that year, too, which was a big thing for us. And then right after that, I went into the military for 3 years and shot with the international trap team. So that was just kind of how I first got exposed. And then going into the military, of course, we were shooting all international trap. And then once again, after coming out of shooting international trap for 3 years, 16-yard shooting and American trap shooting seemed incredibly easy. You didn't have all the angle and all the speed. And the only thing that was different was that you had distance, which really, when you're shooting a shotgun, distance means everything, and speed of target means everything. And so when I went to American Trap, it seemed easy. And then when I actually went from the Model 12 Winchester on American Trap to the Perazzi TM1, it even got about 3 steps easier. That was a real game changer for me, going to a long single barrel with an amazingly quick trigger system. Just made all the difference and probably changed my career in some ways, because this happened while I was in college. And I become so effective in handicap shooting with the TM1, it did change the course of my career. I went ahead and graduated through college and then just followed a different path than what I originally was on. Tournaments were pretty lucrative back in those days, and you could make money going to ATA trap tournaments. And I used to kind of select my tournaments, have a minimum of 3 handicap events in them, and to justify traveling and things like that. And I did that right up until 1982, early 82. And then I was in that point to where, okay, it was a time I needed to decide what I was going to do with my life at that point. And I loved the trap shooting deal, but the trap shooting game was changing a little bit. Things were getting a little different than what we're used to as far as the big shoots and options and purses. And so when I had the opportunity to go north and take on a job managing a club in Anchorage, Alaska, I jumped on that. And so I've been kind of in that mode ever since. And I've shot some since then. I just never shot as seriously as I did back from about 1974 through like 82.
Yeah. Now, Steve, I did see, according to the ATA records, in 89, you registered 26,800 total targets.
That's correct.
10,000 of them being singles with a 99.05 average. Then you had 11,900 handicap with a 95.13 average, which is an awesome average from any distance, but especially, the 27 in 89. We weren't shooting lollipop targets back then. So what drove you to shoot that many targets that year?
That was kind of my last hurrah. I'd come out of Alaska in late 87 and again, trying to figure out kind of what I was going to do with myself again. And actually late 88, early 89, I had a feeling this was going to be the last year I was really going to get to shoot a lot, because I had 2 or 3 different irons in the fire. I wasn't quite sure which way it was going to take me. So anyway, I just decided that year, I'm going to spend the year, had the motorhome, just decided we was going to hit all the major shoots that we could, because I knew something would be coming up within that year that was probably going to change the course of my life. And of course it did. I finally put together the package with Irv Goldstein that had the lease on the Las Vegas Gun Club at that time. We put that together in November of 89, early December. And then took over that facility in January of 90. So then I went into a whole different mode again, in that, I'm all in on this business that, I don't know where it's going to take me for sure. I've got experience in it, but I turned down a full-time position with the Federal Aviation Administration to do this. And those things happened in early December 89. I got a letter from the FAA. I'd tested for it and scored high to go into a flight service station, and I had chosen Alaska again. I liked it up there. I lived up there for years. I flew, I owned an aircraft. So I didn't mind going back to Alaska if it was not something related to a boom and bust economy. I wanted to make sure I had some type of solidity. By late 89, I had a daughter that was 5 months old at that point. And so we had a pretty serious meeting. The funny thing was, this letter from the FAA come on the same day that I went to pick up my tickets to fly out to Las Vegas and talk to Irv Goldstein. That night we had dinner and talked about this and with my folks. And so ended up taking Las Vegas and give the federal job back to the government. And we made the trip out west here. I had enough financing to buy out the lease and to buy 6 months material of targets, ammunition, all that. So we were all in. It was either going to be sink or swim. That'll test your resolve, I'll tell you. And by the grace of God, we made it work for 19 years. So I was very thankful for that.
I was lucky enough to be able to come shoot your gun club for a few years before you ended up closing it down. And I could say that it was probably one of the most fun places to shoot in the country. I always loved coming down and shooting those green targets on that background and shooting those days where you had those 200 double events. That's actually how I met Bill Martin. Is I went out and I shot an event where you had 200 doubles, and it was the only place I ever went where you shot 4 traps of 50. And that was my favorite game. I love doubles. And it was like, I went out there and I think I broke a 197, and Bill was like, "Who the heck are you?" And he's like, "You're shooting with us from now on." And I'm like, "All right, Mr. Martin." And, just kind of a cool thing, but I appreciate you sharing that with us today, Steve.
Well, that club, we did a lot of things to make sure that it had a lot of character. We went through a lot to get it to the state that you saw it in when you come out, because when I first got there, I mean, there was a few bars around in gun clubs back in those days, but that would be an impossible task now to try to get licensed for a bar in a gun club in today's world. That club, being that it had operated as the Mint Gun Club and the Sahara Gun Club in prior years, it always had the big antique bar there was kind of the showplace of the main room. And when I first started going out there in 1967, it was the first trip I made out there, it was like a small casino. It was full of freestanding slots, a crap table, a blackjack. And I'm talking about during time when there was a major tournament, like the midwinter tournament or the fall tournament. The Del Webb Corporation had control of the gun club at that time, and they actually put a mini casino out there. They had buffets for breakfast and lunch for the shooters. And so that was the type of treatment that our guests, had experienced in the past when they'd come out there, when it was really in its heyday back in the late 60s and early 70s. And we wanted to try to recreate that. And so, to get it back to that stage was really going to take some doing. And it took almost 4 years to do it. I had to go before, first I had to go before our city council, because even though our lease said it was a lease from the state and would require county licensing, we actually found out we had to go before the city, in that some of the history hadn't been changed over in the computers downtown. And so I had to go, every time we had a major shoot, I had to go before city council and ask for a temporary license. And every time, and rightfully so, one of the city councilmen would say, "Well, wait a minute, you're going to have guns and shooting and you want to have alcohol." And you could never pull that off today. It just wouldn't happen. And so finally, after 4 years, we got the licensing through the county as we should have. We were able to get our county licensing for liquor. We were able to get our county licensing for gaming and put video poker machines in. Of course, we had a restaurant license. And I can't reiterate this enough to anybody thinking about the gun club type business. You need a lot of different revenue streams. And so we ended up with Pro Shop with gun sales, had an FFL for over 30 years altogether. And then you have the restaurant, you have the bar, we had the gaming, and we had the shooting. And, ATA shoots, big shoots were great, but really what really paid the bills for us was our league activity. Wednesday night league was massive. We had up to 280 shooters every Wednesday night.
That's huge.
Come out there and shoot. And they come out and had dinner and played and stayed till late. And it takes a lot of different things to make that type of facility operate. And there's not a lot of private facilities left. I mean, as you know, we're losing a lot of them and more every day, I'm afraid.
It is kind of hard and sad. And I remember earlier, Steve, you mentioned your father was a great shot. Obviously, you're a great shot. There's no question on that. But, I grew up knowing your son, Steph, and his shooting ability. Tell us a little bit about that and how it was, mentoring someone into an All-American and a great shooter the way he was. And I don't know if this is true, but I thought Steph was one of the first people or earliest people to make the 27-yard line from the youngest age. I don't know how tight that is, Rick, but I thought he was he did it at like 12 or 13. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me, I believe if I haven't looked at this for quite a while, but I believe Steph may have been the second youngest to go to the 27-yard line. And the youngest person, at least back in our day, I'm not sure what's happened in the last 10, 15 years, the youngest person was Richie McIntosh. And he also did it at our club. And Richie was a great young sub-junior shooter and was kind of a mentor to Steph, too. Steph really looked up to him. But when Richie was working on this, making the 27-yard line, being the first to do it, I had quite a few conversations with him and his father. And one thing the advice that I give Ricky, and I followed up the same way with my own son, if you're going to get that record and it really means something, don't do it at a marathon. Go to legitimate shoots. They can never use that against you. And Ricky did exactly that. He earned a lot of yardage at the Grand. He earned a lot of yardage at our midwinter and fall shoots and made it to the 27-yard line. Well, when Steph's opportunity rolled around, sure, we could have gone someplace. He had like 2 months to get it left. This was like after the Grand. And we had till, like, I believe, the end of October for him to earn that last half yard. And so we could have went 2 or 3 clubs and got those last couple of hundred targets, 300 that he needed for that half yard. And where did we go? The Missouri Fall Handicap, which was one of the toughest places in the country to shoot at. And so he didn't end up getting it. He ended up getting it later at a shoot we had at our club, I think in November. He broke a 96 and got his last half yard. But I was going to follow the same advice that I give Richie McIntosh. Richie had a legitimate record. He can always be proud of it and has no wrinkles in it whatsoever. So that was the advice I give my son. I think he's done well for it too.
And going back to your club, Steve, there, when you had the lease there for 19 years, I was fortunate to come out and shoot a lot of your big shoots out there. You threw great targets. We shot the green targets most of the time, but I know one year, I can't remember what shoot it was. We shot black targets at one of the shoots. And it was the first time seeing black targets. And I'm like, and these things look like pipe plates flying out there. I won a car at your shoot. I broke back-to-back hundreds in the handicap one year out there. I think it was in 99, if I'm not mistaken. You, not known as also a shooter, but in my opinion, one of the greatest left-handed shooters ever to hold a gun, but probably one of the top gun club managers or owners to run any major shoots. You just knew how to throw a shoot.
Well, thanks, Rick. I always believed in the rule book, and we towards the end, when we stopped having the big shoots back in around 2001, 2002. I mean, for 5 years, I had been dealing with a lot of pressure, from my own constituents coming out, and more often I'm hearing, "Hey, why do you throw such a hot target?" And the truth of the matter was, I had never changed the target setting in all the years I was there. And so that told me very well what was going on around me at other facilities. And we always, we put it on big signage right in the entryway. We're going to set this target to go 50 yards in distance. We're going to set it at 10 feet high. And we're not going to change it unless we have a broken machine or the weather changes considerably. And we maintained that for the whole 19 years I was there. But I caught a lot of criticism for it because everybody else was, and they started staying away from our club as a result because they weren't always getting the scores they wanted that they could get elsewhere. I just wasn't going to bend on that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was a legal target, but it was a good target. We shot a lot of bad weather. You always didn't have the best weather at times, but I remember being at a shoot, and it was one of the 1,000 we shot. I think it was 1,000 handicap target shoot, and I broke something like 97, 98, 99, and 100, and then boom, I broke like a 91, and I was the only one in the 90s that day. And I never forget my dad calling me and chewing my butt out for what happened to you. You were out all night partying, which we did that anyways, But I said, Dad, and he kept on me. And finally, I was like, would you just shut up? And he goes, what? And I go, I was the only one in the 90s. He goes, oh. I said, yeah. I broke 91. I missed like 4 out of the last 10. And I won. I never forget, I won $5,000 and a 1 ounce gold coin. And I got home and I set that on the counter. And my dad looked at it and he goes, is that what you won that day with the bad score? And I said, Dad, a win's a win. I don't care if it was 80, but it was tough. But we dealt with those conditions. But the targets, that's the problem, I think, as we get to now, is shooters back then, we shot targets. You set a target, no one changed it. Now everybody wants to set a target kind of where they want to shoot it versus where the gun club should set it.
Yeah, it seems like we've gotten an awful long ways away from where we used to be. And there's no doubt, I mean, machines are better. You got the voice release now, all that. Yeah. But, when it comes to setting targets, there's a lot of talk too about angle settings, 3-hole versatile, all that. And it never was really the angle that bothered me as much as it was the speed. I mean, to me, speed kills, and play targets in long yardage, especially. And I didn't particularly care if it was a 2-hole or a 3-hole as a shooter. As a matter of fact, the target that probably give me the most trouble, and keep in mind, I mean, I'm left-handed, but when I was over on the right side and get that left angle, or call it the back angle, to me, that was the awkward target when you're shooting a target that's traveling at least 50 yards and in a 3-hole setting. And my shooting was always, I don't know how many people really know this. I've taught it when I teach people, but I set my shooting up years and years and years ago for handicap shooting, because that's where the money was at. And so I probably shot a little quicker than most, trying to cut off as much angle as possible to get the distance in as possible. But the other thing that I did, that I don't know how many shooters really follow this as a guideline, regardless of which way the target went, right, left, or straight away, my gun was going to go off at about the same interval of time after I called pull every time. And that's what I taught. Your hold should be a compromise of what you can see and also how you can move to reach that target in the same amount of time after you call pull, because then you have a consistent point of impact. If you're chasing one target further and taking another one quicker, it's just like changing the point of impact on the gun. That target's in a different part of its climb and altitude if you're doing it that way. So I was always very much a timing type shooter, and I held in such a way that I could get to that target in that same amount of time, no matter which way it went. Had a little blind spot now and then because I held pretty high. But at the same time, I was willing to sacrifice that for the distance I'd already made up on the target and being able to make a shorter move. Everybody does it a different way. You just got to do it the way that works best for you.
And that's crazy that you shared that with us, Steve, because I know a lot of people, and myself being one of them, I'm more of a trigger control person, where I'm looking at the target and I'm riding the target out to where I see it break. And, looking at that West Coast and that time of shooting, the Dan Ulrich time, the Dan Benias time, yourself, I noticed guns were higher in the air and it was more consistent timing, throughout the round. Is that correct?
Well, that's the way I looked at it. And I always set my guns up to shoot very high. I'm not sure how much of this was related to an astigmatism that I had for a long time. I had what you call a vertical astigmatism. And so the target might not always be exactly where I saw it at. And so I had to have the point of adjustment in the pattern to go where I was looking. And so my guns, the last years that I shot for many years, shot 90 to 110% high. And that's where I had to have, but also that's kind of determined by the speed that you shoot. Anybody that shoots quick can use a high impacting gun. And when I first started Steph off, we got an MX2000 for him real early in his career. And the first thing I did was to set that gun, both barrels, to maximum height. And then we set the comb to get the picture that was comfortable for him. And I think that led to his success in just watching shooters over the years. And I've watched a lot of them as far as like right over the shoulder and doing class work with them. The most common miss that I see by shooters is under. And if they're shooting over chronically, they're probably not shooting quick enough. They're trying to be too careful, taking it out a little too far and riding and letting it get to that crest. And so I was always a big advocate on anybody I worked with, high impacting guns, and try to cut the target off in such a way that you can shoot right where it's going. I think a lot of people think when you shoot a high shoot gun, you got to float the target on top of the gun. That if you do that, you're going to shoot under it. I still shot right where the target was going to be next. That was always the picture. It wasn't like it was on top of my gun. I had this bird bead relationship. It wasn't that way. It was almost more of a out of focus, three-dimensional relationship with the end of the barrel and where the target was at, and just let what you know how to do, let it happen. Trust yourself. And so I probably wasn't the best 16-yard shooter in the world because I had geared my game so much for handicap. Had I started out and learned as a little more deliberate shooter, I probably would have been more effective on the 16-yard line, but my handicap scores would have suffered. And that wasn't where the money was at. So that's not the way that I did it.
Well, and then that brings me to like a Bob Munson, who I read in your book. I mean, he's very deliberate, known as one of the greatest single shooters of all time. And you watch him and he strokes that singles target out to the apex every single time. Immense trigger control. Now, he's also won the Grand America handicap with 100 straight, so you can't say that he's a horrible handicap shooter. But when you think of Bob Munson, you think singles, right? And
singles and doubles.
And singles and doubles. And that's just one's methodical and one's just aggressive attack. Do you think a shooter could try to have all three in their pocket? Or do you think they're always going to be inclined to one or the other?
Well, I think style of shooting is definitely going to make you stronger in some areas than others. And you got to go back again to the time when I picked this up and become competitive at it and was even making a living at it. If you was going to make any money in a big handicap, even then you needed to score by itself. And you probably wasn't going to get that unless the weather conditions were awful. And so I thrived in the bad weather. In the first book, I mentioned shooting with Dan Orlick at Bob Taylor's and having a 95 in one of the 100 grand handicaps there. That was a big win. But what I didn't mention was 2 weeks before over at the Mint Gun Club, I did something very similar. And it was Friday's handicap. It was a Sahara handicap. And a lot of shooters, and weather was awful. The weather was coming down the valley out of the northwest with 30, 40 mile an hour winds and gusts. And so you have the opportunity here to make a big score, not a big score as far as scoring on clay targets, a big score in the dollar column.
Yeah.
And so nobody was out on the practice trap. They was using the practice trap right in front of the clubhouse, and nobody was out there. So I decided I've got to go out and figure out what I have to do to break this target. And I went out and spent 3 rounds out there shooting by myself. And the lefts were high and climbing, and the straightaways were drifting feet, and the right angles were diving. And so, okay, where do I have to be on these targets to break these targets? And so after 3 rounds of practice, I felt fairly comfortable. And keep in mind, I'm left-handed because it's important in this context. When I got a left-hand target, I couldn't hardly get far enough above it or far enough in front of it, and I could still break it. You'd think I'd be 10 feet to the left and the target would still break. Straightaways, you had to come right up the side of them and be 4 to 6 foot to the left of them and let the shot drift into them. And a right-hand target, if you let it, it was gone. You actually had to come in behind it and almost touch the back of it and let it go. Now, this is against everything your instincts is telling you to do that you've been doing for years. And you have to apply a new instinct for 100 targets, and you have to do it quickly. You don't have time to measure it out. And probably the most exhausting 2 handicaps I ever shot was that one at the Sahara and the one 2 weeks later at Bob Taylor's. And as it turned out, I had a 92 there at the Sahara at the old Mint Gun Club in that handicap. And that was an $8,000 pop, and it was all by itself. And so, I mean, that score combined with the 95 at Taylor's, in today's money, that was $60,000. And that's why we got out and did it back in those days. Today, why would a guy want to go out there and fight those conditions today?
100%. I think that the severity of the target, a little bit of a harder target, allows for less splits and allows for that money. And that is attractive for a lot of shooters, I would say. And I think, one point that you brought up earlier on your gun club, you had a sign that said, "We don't adjust anything." I mean, I think that now when you go to any place, the shoot management's really trying to tailor that target for the individual. Hey, we want them up. Hey, we want them down. And I think it slows down the efficiency of the shoot. And I think it also, it hurts the fairness a little bit, because I think you should go in and set a target, and that target is what it is. And barring the gun club management coming out and rechanging the line because of weather, everyone shoots it. And I think that helps with your splits in a good way.
Yeah.
Well, as our shooting group got older, and I mean, things just change. It's a natural evolving. When you get older, you don't feel like going out and fighting conditions, and you want to break good scores. But the game has changed so much. And like I say, by the time at the end of our big shoot period in Las Vegas, I mean, I was kind of the bad guy out there. They could go south or they could go north and break bigger scores. And so what are you going to do with that? So I really changed the business in about 2001 or two. I had to. It was just a matter of surviving. And so I had to change the business. We took out a bunch of trap fields down the East End, put in sporting clays, expanded our membership. We just had to change our whole business model. It wasn't that I didn't like ATA trap anymore. I had a business I had to try to protect and make it work as best as I could. So I just had to change the business model. The ATA kind of changed on me, really.
So I relate my shooting style to your gun club. I mean, I came out to almost all your big shoots. I mean, heck, my cell phone number's out of Las Vegas because we used to come out there and hold, what was his name? The casino, Jim Heckroth.
Right.
He let me use his address to get an AT&T cell phone because we couldn't get them in Nebraska back then. But I loved coming out there because you went down, you shot the targets that you set. I mean, I shot a lot with Leo out there. I shot with past shooters, Tom Buxman, which we just lost here around Thanksgiving time. I stood right next to Tom and won my car. It's your car shoot. I think it was the second year you had it. And then, breaking hundreds in handicaps with shooting with Zerngast and Larry Bumstead. A lot of great shooters shot out there. Bonilla shot out there all the time. Heck, he even cooked food for people, but that's the difference. Like you talk about your style of shooting, Steve, being more related to handicap. And in your era, my coach and mentor was Frank Hoppe, and Frank was more a single shooter, kind of like Bob Munson. Frank held a high gun. He was real deliberate. And I remember Frank telling me one time, he's like, you got to be more deliberate. And I was more into the handicap because I couldn't do this without winning money.
Right.
So I was like, well, Frank, if I hold lower, I can see the target much quicker and drive to it. And my singles suffered. I'll never forget, my dad telling me one time, he's like, you broke a 395 in the all around and you had a 196 in the singles. And I'm like, yeah. I said, I broke a 99 in the handicap, won that and won the doubles. I said, Dad, and singles don't pay the bills. He goes,
We're good.
Yeah. Yeah. He goes, but you ain't going to be winning these overalls. And that's when I kind of changed my game a little bit to more the trigger control as far as singles. Like, okay, just be a little more deliberate. And I stayed out there to this day, and I've got some long runs the last couple of years of in the thousands and singles, but it's like, okay, each time I'm like, just see the target versus handicap. It's like, there it is, shoot. But, going back to the way you set targets and, saying you're the bad guy, honestly, Steve, I think you set some of the best targets in the country for a money shoot, because that's what they were. Everybody came out there. I mean, heck, I got married out there, and I think 05 in the December shoot you had, I called Jody, and we were going to get married the next year. I said, let's go to Vegas next week and get married. So, we came out to the shoot, but I lost some money in the casino, came out, won a handicap, won it back. She just shaking her head. You can't do those nowadays. Now you got to win the whole shoot.
I think we caught the tail end of it. I mean, really, I wish I could have done it 10 years earlier, because we could tell, I mean, things were changing rapidly in the 90s, and we had one more shot there to get trap shooters back into the casinos and hotels and get some casino and hotel support. But a lot of the guys that were trying to support the shoot, they didn't gamble like they used to back in the 60s and 70s. The trap shooters that we knew in the ATA for many years, they were kind of gambler types and aggressive types, and had fun and would go throw dice and play all the money in a handicap. And in the 90s, that was changing rapidly, and I talked to a lot of hotel executives, and Jim Heckroth would be able to verify this if he was still with us. in the 90s, we had the Rio, we had the Aladdin, we had several good casino hosts still putting money in, but I kept hearing the same thing after the shoots. We didn't know the shooters were even there,
Yeah.
other than we had a room block out. And of course, this was about the time they started using the players' cards to try to track activity. Well, a lot of the shooters were suspicious of these player cards. And what do they want to know about me? I don't want them to know how much I'm playing or gambling or what. And that was the basis that they used if they was going to do a future room block for you and put on a big deal for the shooters. And if they didn't see any indication of them in their gambling, that was soon going to dry up, and it did. Like I say, we kind of caught some of the best of it right at the end, and by 2000, that was all pretty much gone.
Yeah, I remember coming out there, and we always stayed at the Rio. You got cheap rooms, great time, and I remember one of the last times gambling, throwing dice, playing craps was me, Gerald Chrisman, Lucky Nightingale, Dana Dobson, Doc Ross Warren, Pat McCarthy, Dick Mariscola, and Russ McClellan was actually there. And we had a whole table to ourselves, and we threw dice it was a couple hours, but I'll never forget one of the deals. I think it was Dana or Lucky was like, I don't have a player's card. I don't want one of those. Nick, same deal. They didn't want the casino knowing if they were spending 10,000 or 100,000, and I was like, hey man, to get you free food, I'm getting a player's card.
So they didn't, and they didn't care if you won or lost. They just wanted to see that you was providing action, because they made all their future decisions based on that. And it just kind of dwindled away eventually. And it was unfortunate because the casinos, did put a lot into the shoots historically years ago. You look at some of the old programs, if you've got any of the old trap fields from the 60s, early 70s, and new Cadillacs and Thunderbirds and, mink stoles for the ladies' luncheon. And, it just went on and on and on, and huge guaranteed purses. We caught the very end of the very heyday of trap shooting in our period. And it's just a shame that the kids coming up nowadays will never experience anything quite like that. And so, again, that was part of the reasoning for trying to get this down on paper. And you mentioned Dick Mariscola. Dick and I talk all the time, and he is the reason these books even exist. He and I was having a phone conversation one day, and we got talking about things that happened around the clubhouse, back in the Las Vegas Gun Club, and when Russ McClellan was around, and just we'd laugh about it. And Dick says, "God dang," Steve says, he says, you really ought to write a book, and I said, "Oh, geez, Dick," I said, I don't have a single note. I don't have a single note, and I thought about this, and then COVID hit. We had our COVID hit out here, and everything shut down in March of 2020. And all of a sudden I was on a 4-day work week. And so I had this kind of extra day, and I thought, maybe let me put a story together, and that Dick would know, that he would be very aware of, and I'll use him as a test on this. And so I wrote the story. Matter of fact, it was the story about Don Carlson from Texas and Dick Mariscola, and their first interaction in the clubhouse at Las Vegas was hilarious. And so anyway, I wrote this story out the best that I could remember it all. And again, it's all from memory. And I'm going to be 74 next month. I'm really reaching here. So anyway, I got it all done, and I called Dick up and I said, "Hey, Dick, I'm going to send you over a Word doc. I want you to take a look at it." And I said, "This is kind of a litmus test for you and me both." So I sent it over to him, and he got back with me. He says, "That is exactly how that all went down." And I says, "Okay, maybe I've got something here." So that led to the first book, and that story is featured in the first book.
Yep.
And then
I got my book right here.
Okay, that's in there about Dick Mariscola and Don Carlson, and from there, after the first book come out, it generated so much interest, and I had phone calls and emails and texts from people I hadn't seen for 25, 30 years. That had heard about it, read about it, and it brought back more stories. And so by the time the first book went to actual publication, I had another couple dozen stories ready to go. And that's why the second book was able to come out so quickly behind it, because it was already 3/4 done when the first one went to publication. If there'll be any more, I doubt it. I think I'm probably pretty used up as an author now. But I was glad I was able to get down what I got down and believe it to be as accurate as I can remember it to be.
Yeah, no, I've read the book, the first one, like I said, and it's cool seeing the pictures in the back.
Yeah.
Back when I was a baby face. Yeah, right there.
You're in there.
There's Ricky right there. I don't know if anyone can recognize him. He's really skinny and really young.
Right next to Phil Kiner there. Yeah, and it's so funny. You talk about Don Carlson, his wife Judy took pictures of everybody.
Yes.
And I still, it's funny. I was going through some stuff here the other day, and now that my son Tyler's shooting and he's kind of into the history a little bit now, like I was. I've always been in the history of shooting, and he was asking some stuff. So I pulled out some pictures, and it's funny. The first envelope I pulled out was from Judy Carlson, and it was nice little note in there. Hey, I hope you and Jody are doing okay. Here's some and it was pictures. I think it's one of me and Dawn standing next to each other, because he'd won some trophies out there. They come out and had a good time. And that was just like, we've talked on all our podcasts. It's not so much about the shooting, and Steve, you're a well-accomplished shooter. Like I said, in my opinion, you're one of the greatest left-handed shooters ever. And, I've had my fortune and won my fair share, but looking back, it's not about the trophies or the rings you win. It's about the friends and the friendships, the people you meet. Yeah. The good times. I remember sitting at your club and playing cards till I don't know how late with people playing either poker tournaments or we used to play a ton of hearts out there and then gamble. I used to laugh, I'd play those slot machines up there and I'd always say, just giving Steve and Lydia and Steph's college fund. And then boom, you'd hit a 4 of a kind and everybody be happy. And, so we just had a lot of great times at your club. And I've been to the new club that you currently are. Now what's your job's title there for the Clark County?
Well, I'm an administrator. I'm in the office down the main office. My title is actually senior management analyst, and I'm coming up on my 12th year there now. And the time has obviously really flown by. And so I'm not so hands-on out in the field like I was with the Las Vegas Gun Club, but I've got a great team of people under me that just do such a fabulous job. And it gives me the opportunity to sit back and look at the big picture and work on the future. And of course, it's not just a clay target club. We have a lot of rifle pistol activity, an education center where people are taught. We even have an archery center. And it's a huge facility. It's a long ways from being fully built out. We have 2,880 acres there altogether. And what the master plan says we're going to do and what we actually end up doing is a little uncertain right now. But it's certainly, I enjoy going to work. It's 4 miles from me. I don't fight any traffic. Yeah. And when I was hired when I went through my final interview, the assistant county or the parks director and the assistant county manager that finished the interview with me, they asked, what's going to be the most difficult thing for you to achieve here? And I said, just working 40 hours a week. And so how do you work so little? Change from the old Las Vegas Gun Club was 70, 80-hour weeks for 19 years.
Yeah. You definitely worked very hard. I seen it when we came and visited, and it was an amazing thing. Steve, these books are awesome. I've read the first one. Haven't got a chance to read the second one yet, but for the listeners, what's the best way to get a copy of your book? Is it on Amazon or is it emailing you directly? Or, what's the best way?
Well, both books are on Amazon. They're available as ebook. They're available hardcover. They're available as paperback. And I'm going to be going down to the Spring Grand in Tucson. I'll be down there on Saturday, the 18th, and have a book signing period there with the White Flyer Elite Shotgun Building from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. that day. And people can get them there, or they're more than welcome to bring copies they already have. I'd be glad to sign them for them. So I will be down there. And then if you come by the club or you're out this way, I can send you a signed copy if you'd like me to mail you one. Just let me know by email or give me a call. I'm easy to find there at the club, and I'd be glad to do that too.
What's the best email for you or best contact way? That way people can hear it today on the podcast.
Well, I would use the steve.carmichael@clarkcountynv.gov and just email me at that number, and I'll certainly get it at that email address, and I'll be glad to send somebody a signed copy if that's the best way for them to receive one.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we appreciate you so much, Steve. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today before we close, or is there anyone that you'd like to thank?
Well, just want to thank all you guys. I mean, everybody that's working to promote the game. You know, we're going into a new phase now, and these high schoolers, we need to get them in. The high school team shooting, I think, would be the strongest avenue for a trap club operator to pursue right now. Because if you get the high schoolers and the school districts and the politicians on your side around these young shooters, you'll do okay. Plus, you'll have a lot of activity, and these high school teams will be self-perpetuating. So I would definitely be going after them right now.
That's fantastic advice. Ricky, is there anything that you want to close out with Steve? Because I know we're probably going to need to ask him to come on again, because we can just hear his stories out of his book all day long, and our listeners would love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate you being on, Steve. It's great to catch up. I know I was just out in Vegas for ShotCo, and then I did a lesson with John Slinker and his wife up at the club there. And I'd just like to say the club is beautiful. I haven't got to shoot any targets. I've taught lessons up there twice, once with Bill Daniels' son and now with John. And I tell you, they pick up the holes. Everything's clean, beautiful place. So anybody that wants to come, I think the Nevada State Trap Shoots is it in October?
October, yeah. It's in October. And I talked with John the other day. He's a great guy. Yep. Looking forward to getting more people out to your shoot, because we're hearing nothing but great things.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. Yeah. I'll put out something here for too long too about, the opportunities to come out and stay with us if you have an RV during the winter. Cause I've got it set up now where you can shoot 7 days a week. We've got the systems in where you have your own RFID card to get out and shoot. So I'll be putting some more out on that pretty soon.
Okay. Perfect.
That's wonderful. Well, we'd like to thank our sponsors of Trap Talk, obviously Remington, Wenig, Stockworks, Bobby and Luke Chambers for everything they do. Also our new sponsor, Shot Tracker, and another new sponsor. You can't do it without Ricky Marshall himself at RM Shooting Clinics. Give everyone a chance if you can. They're great companies, and they care about the shooting sports. They're trying to advance everyone as much as possible. We appreciate you, Steve. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll look forward to hearing you on another episode of Trap Talk again.
I'll look forward to it. Thanks a lot, you guys, for doing this. I think it's great that you're doing this, and best of luck in this endeavor.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.